Welcome back to Sleep 2 RPG, where epic gaming lore meets peaceful rest. Tonight, we journey into the realm of Thedas to explore the profound impact of faith and divine authority. Over the next few hours, we'll uncover the origins of the Chantry, the legend of Andraste, and how religious doctrine has shaped the very fabric of civilization across the Dragon Age world. So get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's begin this adventure together into the sacred and the political, the divine and the mortal. The foundation of faith, understanding the Maker. To truly comprehend the immense influence of the Chantry across Thedas, we must first understand the deity at its heart. The Maker, according to Andrastian theology, stands as the supreme creator of all existence. Unlike the pantheons of old gods, worshipped by various cultures throughout Thedas, the Maker represents absolute monotheism, the single divine source from which all life springs. Chantry doctrine teaches that the Maker created not just the physical world of Thedas, but also the Fade, that mysterious realm where spirits dwell and mages draw their power. He crafted the first spirits as his children, beings of pure intention and thought. These spirits were meant to be his companions in the vastness of creation, perfect reflections of divine will and purpose. But the Maker's greatest act of creation, according to the Chant of Light, was the Golden City. This magnificent realm sat at the very heart of the Fade, a perfect testament to divine architecture and power. Its spires reached beyond mortal comprehension. Its halls echoed with celestial harmony. And from its central throne, the Maker watched over all creation with benevolent eyes. The tragedy that defines all subsequent Andrastian theology stems from humanity's original sin. The Chantry teaches that mortals, in their pride and ambition, turned away from their creator. They began worshipping the old gods, those draconic entities that whispered promises of power from beneath the earth. This betrayal struck the Maker deeply, causing him to withdraw from his creation in profound disappointment. The nature of the Maker's abandonment is particularly poignant in Andrastian belief. He did not destroy his creation in wrath, nor did he curse humanity with immediate punishment. Instead, he simply turned away, closing his eyes and ears to the prayers and pleas of his children. This divine silence became the defining characteristic of the post-paradise world, a realm where mortals must prove their worthiness through faith and devotion rather than direct divine intervention. According to the Chantry's teaching, the Maker will not return until all peoples of Thedas have accepted the Chant of Light and united under Andrastian faith. This monumental task drives much of the Chantry's missionary work and, tragically, many of its more violent interventions throughout history. The promise of the Maker's return, of a restored paradise where divine presence once again graces the world, serves as both hope and justification for countless acts performed in his name. The theological implications of this absent deity cannot be overstated. Unlike active gods who intervene in mortal affairs, the Maker's withdrawal creates a void that must be filled by mortal institutions. The Chantry positions itself as the earthly vessel of divine will, interpreting ancient texts and dreams to guide the faithful in the absence of direct divine communication. This responsibility grants enormous power to the religious hierarchy, power that has shaped the political landscape of Thedas for over a millennium. The concept of divine testing also permeates Andrastian thought. Every hardship, every challenge faced by the faithful can be interpreted as the Maker's way of testing their devotion and worthiness. This theological framework has provided comfort to countless believers throughout the ages, but it has also justified tremendous suffering in the name of spiritual purification and divine purpose. In the silence left by the Maker's withdrawal, the Chantry teaches that he still watches and feels for his creation. When the faithful suffer, the Maker sheds tears for their pain. When they achieve righteousness, he feels joy at their success. This emotional connection between deity and mortal, despite the barrier of divine silence, creates an intensely personal relationship between believers and their absent God. The theological sophistication of Andrastian doctrine extends beyond simple monotheism to encompass complex questions of free will, divine justice, and cosmic purpose. The Chantry scholars have spent centuries debating the precise nature of the Maker's plan, the meaning of divine silence, and the requirements for earning redemption. These theological discussions often have profound political implications, as different interpretations of divine will can justify vastly different approaches to governance, warfare, and social policy. The Maker's creation of the veil, that barrier between the physical world and the Fade, represents another crucial aspect of Andrastian cosmology. According to Chantry teaching, this barrier protects mortals from the chaotic influences of the spirit world, while also limiting their access to magical power. The theological implications of this divine architecture continue to influence debates about the proper role of magic in society and the relationship between the spiritual and physical realms. Understanding the Maker's place in Andrastian theology provides essential context for everything that follows. The absent deity's influence permeates every aspect of Chantry doctrine, from the humblest prayer to the grandest crusade. His silence shapes how believers interpret the world around them, how they understand their place in creation, and how they justify their actions in pursuit of divine favor. As we delve deeper into the story of Andraste and the Chantry she inspired, keep in mind this foundational relationship between an absent creator and his abandoned children. The longing for divine return, the hope of redemption, and the terrible responsibility of acting in God's name without direct guidance. These themes echo through every chapter of Thedas's religious history. The prophet of the Maker, Andraste's divine calling. In the annals of Thedas history, no figure looms larger than Andraste, the prophet whose visions and teachings would reshape the spiritual landscape of an entire world. Her story begins not in the halls of power or the sanctuaries of established religion, but in the harsh realities of slavery within the Tevinter Imperium, that ancient nation where magic ruled and human bondage was the foundation of prosperity. Born sometime around -195 ancient years, Andraste entered a world where the old gods commanded worship, and the Maker's name had been all but forgotten. Her early life remains shrouded in the mists of legend and conflicting historical accounts, but most sources agree that she was taken as a slave to Tevinter during a raid against her tribal homeland in what would later become Ferelden. The young woman who would become the most influential religious figure in Thedas's history experienced firsthand the cruelties of imperial slavery. In the great cities of Tevinter, she witnessed the excesses of the Magister class, their casual cruelty toward those they considered lesser beings, and their hubris in believing themselves equal to gods. These experiences would profoundly shape her later teachings about humility, compassion, and the fundamental equality of all souls before their creator. It was during her years in bondage that Andraste first began experiencing the dreams and visions that would define her prophetic calling. Unlike the elaborate ritual communications sought by Tevinter's magisters in their pursuit of power, Andraste's divine encounters came unbidden, arriving in moments of deepest despair and suffering. She spoke of hearing a voice of infinite compassion, calling to her across the silence that had fallen over creation. The nature of these divine communications has been debated by scholars and theologians for centuries. Andraste herself described them not as commands or demands, but as gentle conversations with a loving parent who grieved for his lost children. The Maker according to her accounts, did not speak to her of conquest or dominion, but of love, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption for all who had strayed from his path. These early revelations contained several key themes that would become central to Andrastian doctrine. First was the concept of universal spiritual equality. Regardless of race, social status, or magical ability, all souls were equal in the Maker's eyes. This radical notion challenged the very foundations of Tevinter society, where magical talent and noble birth determined one's place in the social hierarchy. Second was the emphasis on compassion and mercy over judgment and punishment. While the Maker had indeed withdrawn from creation due to humanity's sins, Andraste taught that he yearned for reconciliation rather than retribution. This message of hope proved enormously appealing to the downtrodden masses of the Empire, offering them not just spiritual comfort, but the promise of fundamental change. Third was the call for liberation, not just from physical bondage, but from the spiritual slavery that came from worshipping false gods. Andraste's teachings presented the old gods not as divine beings to be revered, but as deceptive entities that had led humanity astray through promises of power and dominion. True freedom, she proclaimed, could only come through returning to the worship of the one true creator. As Andraste's message spread through the slave quarters and lower levels of Tevinter society, she began attracting followers who shared her visions of spiritual liberation. These early disciples came from all walks of life: fellow slaves seeking hope in their suffering, common citizens disillusioned with the Magister's rule, and even some members of the nobility who had grown troubled by their society's excesses. The growing movement faced immediate persecution from Tevinter authorities, who recognized the inherent threat that Andraste's teachings posed to their established order. A religion that proclaimed the equality of all souls and condemned the pursuit of magical power struck at the very heart of magocracy. Early followers faced imprisonment, torture, and death, but their martyrdom only served to strengthen the faith of those who remained. During this period of persecution, Andraste herself managed to escape from slavery through circumstances that remain unclear in historical records. Some accounts credit divine intervention, others suggest assistance from sympathetic magisters or fellow slaves, while still others claim she simply walked away from her bonds when her captors became entranced by her preaching. Regardless of the mechanism, her liberation marked a crucial turning point in the development of the faith that would bear her name. Free from physical bondage but not from her divine calling, Andraste began traveling throughout the southern regions of Thedas, spreading her message to anyone who would listen. Her preaching style, as recorded by early disciples, emphasized accessibility and emotional connection rather than complex theological argument. She spoke in the common tongue rather than the scholarly languages favored by established religions, and her parables drew from everyday experiences that resonated with ordinary people. The growing movement attracted attention not just from religious authorities, but from political leaders as well. In the fractured tribal territories south of Tevinter, various chieftains and warlords began to see potential in Andraste's unifying message. Her call for spiritual liberation could be easily adapted to the cause of political independence from imperial rule. It was during this period that Andraste encountered Mafarath, the Alamari chieftain, who would become both her husband and, ultimately, her betrayer. Their relationship represents one of the most complex and tragic elements of Andraste's story, embodying the eternal tension between spiritual and temporal power that would plague the Chantry throughout its history. Mafarath initially embraced Andraste's message with apparent sincerity, perhaps seeing in her both a spiritual guide and a potential political ally. Their marriage united her growing religious movement with his tribal confederation, creating a powerful combination of spiritual authority and military might. This alliance would prove crucial in the events that followed, as Andraste's message evolved from peaceful reform to armed resistance. The transformation of Andraste from prophet to war leader represents a controversial aspect of her legacy that different traditions interpret in vastly different ways. Some accounts portray her as a reluctant military commander, driven to violence only by the necessities of defending her followers from imperial persecution. Others suggest that her divine visions explicitly called for armed resistance against the forces of evil that had corrupted Tevinter. What seems clear from multiple sources is that Andraste did not seek conquest for its own sake, nor did she pursue personal power or wealth. Her military campaigns consistently focused on liberation, freeing slaves, overthrowing corrupt magisters, and establishing territories where her followers could practice their faith without fear of persecution. Even her enemies acknowledged that she treated prisoners with unprecedented mercy and actively discouraged the kind of rapine and pillage that typically accompanied ancient warfare. The strategic brilliance of Andraste's campaigns stemmed not just from military tactics, but from her ability to inspire absolute devotion among her followers. Soldiers who believed they fought for divine approval and spiritual liberation proved far more motivated than those fighting merely for pay or political advantage. Her army grew not through conscription, but through conversion, as word of her victories spread and more oppressed peoples flocked to her banner. The culmination of Andraste's military success came with her assault on the heart of the Tevinter Imperium itself. Leading a confederation of tribal armies, freed slaves and religious converts, she struck deep into imperial territory, liberating cities and dismantling the infrastructure of magical tyranny. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the entire established order of northern Thedas might crumble before the advance of the prophet and her army. But success bred its own problems, as the realities of governing conquered territories began to conflict with the spiritual ideals that had motivated the original movement. Questions of law, administration, and political authority created tensions between Andraste's role as religious leader and the practical needs of running an expanding domain. These tensions would prove crucial in understanding the events that led to her ultimate betrayal and martyrdom. The relationship between Andraste and Mafarath during this period of triumph remains one of the most debated aspects of the entire story. Some sources suggest that political pressures and the corrupting influence of power gradually drove a wedge between the spiritual visionary and her more pragmatically minded husband. Others propose that Mafarath harbored jealousy toward his wife's divine calling and growing influence among their followers. The tragic end of Andraste's earthly mission would come not through military defeat, but through personal betrayal, setting the stage for her transformation from historical figure to religious icon. Her death would prove far more powerful than her life in shaping the faith that would dominate Thedas for centuries to come. The martyrdom, betrayal, and the birth of a religion. The betrayal and martyrdom of Andraste represents perhaps the most pivotal moment in the religious history of Thedas, transforming a regional reform movement into a continent-spanning faith that would endure for over a millennium. The circumstances surrounding her death reveal the complex interplay of personal ambition, political calculation, and genuine religious fervor that would continue to characterize the Chantry throughout its history. As Andraste's military campaigns reached their zenith, with imperial forces in retreat and entire provinces declaring independence from Tevinter rule, the strains within her own coalition began to show. The alliance between spiritual reformers and tribal warriors that had proven so effective in warfare faced new challenges when confronted with the realities of governance and long-term political organization. At the heart of these tensions lay the fundamental question of authority and succession. While Andraste's divine calling provided unquestionable legitimacy for the movement's spiritual mission, the practical business of ruling conquered territories required different skills and different forms of authority. Mafarath, as her husband and the leader of the largest tribal confederation within the alliance, found himself increasingly responsible for administrative and military decisions that Andraste's prophetic visions did not directly address. The historical record becomes particularly fragmentary when dealing with the precise motivations behind Mafarath's ultimate betrayal. Chantry doctrine, naturally, portrays him as consumed by jealousy and ambition, unable to accept his wife's divine authority and growing popularity among their followers. This interpretation serves the theological purpose of demonstrating how earthly concerns can corrupt even those closest to divine truth. However, alternative sources suggest a more complex picture. Some accounts describe Mafarath as genuinely believing that Andraste's prophetic mission had become dangerous to their people's survival. The unprecedented success of their campaigns had drawn the attention of every major power in northern Thedas, and the inevitable imperial counterattack promised to be devastating. From this perspective, Mafarath's actions might be seen as a desperate attempt to save their people from annihilation, even at the cost of betraying his wife. Other historical fragments hint at pressure from within the Tevinter establishment itself. Certain magisters, recognizing that they could not defeat Andraste militarily, may have approached Mafarath with offers of accommodation and power sharing in exchange for ending the religious war that threatened to destroy their empire. The promise of peaceful coexistence and autonomous rule for the southern territories might have seemed preferable to continued warfare with uncertain outcomes. The method of betrayal itself reveals much about the careful calculation behind Mafarath's decision. Rather than attempting to kill Andraste directly or turning her over to imperial forces in the field, he chose to arrange her capture during what she believed was a diplomatic mission. This approach allowed him to maintain plausible deniability with his own followers, while ensuring that responsibility for her fate would ultimately rest with Tevinter authorities. The location chosen for the betrayal also carries symbolic significance. The meeting was arranged at Minrat House, the imperial capital and heart of Tevinter power. By delivering Andraste directly to her enemy's stronghold, Mafarath ensured that her capture would serve as a powerful demonstration of imperial authority and a devastating blow to the morale of her followers. Andraste's trial in Minrat House represented a carefully orchestrated political theatre designed to accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously. The Tevinter authorities needed to discredit her divine claims while avoiding the creation of a martyr whose death might inspire even greater resistance. The proceedings therefore focused on portraying her as a deluded fanatic rather than a genuine prophet, emphasizing the supposedly irrational nature of her beliefs and the dangerous consequences of her teachings. The theological significance of the trial extends beyond its immediate political purposes. Chantry doctrine interprets Andraste's steadfast faith in the face of persecution as a perfect demonstration of divine love and mortal devotion. Her refusal to renounce her beliefs or compromise her message, even when faced with certain death, provides a powerful example for believers in all subsequent generations. The manner of Andraste's execution carries profound symbolic weight that continues to resonate in Chantry ritual and theology. Death by fire, the method chosen by her Tevinter captors, serves as a powerful metaphor for purification and transformation. The flames that consumed her earthly body are interpreted by believers as the vehicle for her spiritual ascension to eternal union with the Maker. The immediate aftermath of Andraste's death proved even more politically significant than her life had been. Rather than ending the religious uprising as Tevinter authorities had hoped, her martyrdom provided the movement with its most powerful symbol and its most compelling call to action. The image of the innocent prophet burned by corrupt magisters resonated far beyond the immediate circle of her followers, inspiring sympathy and support from populations that had previously remained neutral. Mafarath's position in the aftermath of the betrayal proved untenable almost immediately. While he had succeeded in eliminating his wife and potentially saving his people from imperial retaliation, he had also destroyed his own legitimacy as a leader. The religious movement that had provided much of his political power could hardly continue to support the man who had betrayed their prophet, regardless of his motivations. The fragmentation of Andraste's coalition following her death might have spelled the end of the religious movement entirely, were it not for the actions of her most devoted disciples. Rather than allowing the faith to die with its founder, these early believers took upon themselves the task of preserving and spreading her teachings. Their efforts to collect, organize, and disseminate Andraste's words would eventually result in the creation of the Chant of Light, the foundational text of the faith that bears her name. The process of creating this sacred text represented far more than simple historical documentation. The disciples who undertook this task were not merely scribes recording events, but theologians and spiritual leaders working to transform a collection of teachings, visions, and experiences into a coherent religious doctrine capable of guiding believers for generations to come. The political implications of Andraste's martyrdom extended far beyond the immediate aftermath of her death. Her transformation from living prophet to spiritual symbol created a form of authority that no earthly power could destroy or corrupt. The martyred Andraste became far more powerful than the living woman had ever been, providing the nascent faith with an unassailable foundation for its claims to divine legitimacy. The geographical spread of Andrastian belief following the martyrdom demonstrated the power of religious conviction to transcend political boundaries. While Mafarath's tribal confederation gradually disintegrated and the immediate military threat to Teventer diminished, the spiritual movement continued to grow throughout the southern regions of Thedas. Communities that had never seen Andraste herself or participated in her campaigns nevertheless embraced her teachings and began organizing their own religious practices around her example. The development of martyrdom theology within early Andrastian thought provided the movement with a powerful framework for understanding suffering and persecution. Andraste's willing acceptance of death, rather than betrayal of her divine mission, established a pattern that countless later believers would follow when faced with their own trials. The promise of spiritual reward for earthly sacrifice became a central tenet of the faith, one that would motivate both individual heroism and collective action throughout the subsequent history of the Chantry. The emergence of miracle stories and divine interventions associated with Andraste's death served to reinforce her status as a genuine prophet rather than a mere political leader. Accounts of her ashes being miraculously preserved, of healing powers associated with relics of her martyrdom, and of visions granted to the faithful all contributed to the development of a sophisticated theological framework surrounding her divine nature. The theological debates that emerged in the immediate aftermath of Andraste's death would shape Chantry doctrine for centuries to come. Questions about the precise nature of her relationship with the Maker, the extent of her divine authority, and the proper interpretation of her teachings created the need for institutional religious authority capable of providing definitive answers to such complex spiritual questions. The political vacuum created by the collapse of Andraste's coalition and the delegitimization of Mafarath's rule created opportunities for new forms of leadership to emerge. The religious movement that had begun as a challenge to established authority now faced the task of creating its own institutions capable of preserving and propagating the faith in the absence of its founding prophet. The Chant of Light, sacred texts, and divine doctrine. The creation of the Chant of Light represents one of the most significant religious and literary achievements in the history of Thedas, transforming the scattered teachings and visions of a martyred prophet into a comprehensive theological framework that would guide millions of believers across centuries. This monumental work emerged not through divine revelation, but through the painstaking efforts of Andraste's surviving disciples, who recognized that their beloved teacher's legacy would survive only if her words were carefully preserved and organized. The earliest versions of what would become the Chant of Light began appearing within decades of Andraste's death, as her immediate followers worked to record everything they could remember of her teachings. These initial efforts were necessarily fragmentary and often contradictory, as different disciples recalled different aspects of her message and emphasized different elements of her divine revelation. The challenge of reconciling these various accounts while maintaining the essential truth of Andraste's prophetic mission would occupy religious scholars for generations. These foundational texts, Threnodies, Andraste, Transfigurations and Trials, attempted to encompass the full scope of divine revelation as understood by the early Andrastian community. Each canticle served a distinct theological purpose while contributing to the overall narrative of creation, fall, redemption, and ultimate restoration that defines Andrastian cosmology. The Canticle of Threnodies deals primarily with cosmogenesis and the earliest history of creation. These verses describe the Maker's creation of the world, the Fade, and the first spirits, as well as the construction of the Golden City as the perfect expression of divine architecture. The theological significance of these creation accounts extends far beyond their literal content, establishing fundamental principles about the nature of divinity, the relationship between spiritual and physical reality, and the original harmony that existed before the fall. Within Threnodies, we find some of the most evocative poetry in all of Andrastian literature, describing the pristine beauty of the newly created world and the perfect communion between creator and creation that characterized the earliest epoch. These passages serve not merely as historical description, but as a vision of what creation could become again if humanity proves worthy of redemption. The emotional power of these verses lies in their combination of loss and hope, mourning for what was destroyed while maintaining faith in what might be restored. The theological complexity of Threnodies becomes apparent in its treatment of the first spirits, those beings created by the Maker to serve as his initial companions and witnesses to creation. The relationship between these primordial spirits and the demons that later plague humanity remains one of the most debated aspects of Andrastian theology. Some interpretations suggest that demons are simply corrupted spirits who fell from grace when the Golden City was violated, while others propose that they represent an entirely different order of beings altogether. The Canticle of Andraste focuses specifically on the life, teachings, and martyrdom of the prophet herself. These verses serve multiple functions within the broader theological framework, providing both historical testimony to Andraste's earthly mission and spiritual instruction for believers seeking to follow her example. The literary style of this canticle differs markedly from the cosmic poetry of Threnodies, employing more direct narrative and practical moral instruction. The portrayal of Andraste within her own canticle reveals the careful balance that early theologians sought to maintain between her humanity and her divine calling. While she is clearly presented as chosen by the Maker for a special mission, she is not depicted as superhuman or removed from ordinary mortal concerns. Her struggles with doubt, her compassion for suffering, and her ultimate willingness to sacrifice everything for her faith make her an accessible model for believers while maintaining her status as a uniquely blessed prophet. The Canticle of Andraste also contains some of the most politically significant passages in the entire Chant of Light, including explicit condemnations of slavery, magical tyranny, and the worship of false gods. These teachings provided the theological foundation for many of the Chantry's later political interventions, from its opposition to Tevinter practices to its support for various liberation movements throughout Thedas. The Canticle of Transfigurations addresses the complex theological questions surrounding magic, the Fade, and the proper relationship between spiritual and temporal authority. These verses attempt to reconcile the obvious reality of magical power with Andrastian teaching about the corrupted nature of the world following humanity's fall from grace. The result is a sophisticated theological framework that acknowledges magic as a legitimate force, while maintaining strict guidelines about its proper use. The theological treatment of mages within transfigurations would prove enormously influential in shaping the Chantry's policies toward magical practitioners throughout its history. Rather than condemning magic itself as inherently evil, these verses emphasize the spiritual dangers that accompany the pursuit of magical power. The proximity of mages to the Fade and their ability to communicate with spirits makes them particularly vulnerable to demonic corruption, requiring special vigilance and spiritual discipline. The political implications of these teachings cannot be overstated. By establishing a theological framework that views magic as potentially dangerous but not inherently evil, Transfigurations provided the foundation for the Chantry's eventual creation of the Circle of Magi. This institution represented an attempt to harness the benefits of magical knowledge, while minimizing the spiritual risks through careful supervision and religious instruction. The Canticle of Trials deals with suffering, persecution, and the ultimate promise of divine restoration. These verses speak directly to believers facing hardship, providing both comfort and encouragement, while maintaining the fundamental Andrastian teaching that earthly suffering serves divine purposes. The theological sophistication of trials lies in its nuanced treatment of pain and loss, acknowledging their reality while insisting on their ultimate meaning within the Maker's plan. The literary power of trials stems from its combination of personal testimony and cosmic vision. Individual verses speak directly to specific forms of suffering, poverty, illness, persecution, loss, while maintaining perspective on the ultimate spiritual significance of these experiences. The result is a deeply practical form of theology that provides genuine comfort to believers while encouraging them to maintain faith despite overwhelming circumstances. The process by which these 4 original canticles were collected, edited, and organized into a coherent whole remains somewhat mysterious, as the historical record from this period is necessarily incomplete. What seems clear is that the work involved multiple generations of scholars and spiritual leaders, each contributing their own insights while working to maintain the essential unity of Andraste's original message. The linguistic challenges involved in creating the Chant of Light were enormous, as Andraste's teachings had been delivered in various languages and dialects depending on her audience. The earliest written versions were composed in Syrian, the common tongue of the Southern Territories, but these were likely translations of oral traditions preserved in Thevenais, Alamari, and other regional languages. The process of translation inevitably involved interpretation, as theological concepts that were clear in one linguistic context required extensive explanation when rendered in another. The literary style of the Chant of Light reflects its origins in oral tradition, with extensive use of repetition, parallel structure, and memorable imagery designed to aid memorization and recitation. The rhythm and meter of many passages suggest that they were originally composed as songs or chants, making them accessible to illiterate populations while ensuring their accurate transmission across generations. The theological debates surrounding the proper interpretation of various passages within the Chant of Light began almost immediately after its initial compilation and continue to this day. Different regions and communities emphasize different aspects of Andraste's teaching, leading to the development of what scholars term the cults of the Maker. Various religious movements that all claimed legitimacy based on the Chant of Light, but interpreted its requirements quite differently. The political uses to which the Chant of Light was put almost from its creation reveal the inherent tension between spiritual and temporal authority that would plague the Chantry throughout its history. Ambitious rulers quickly recognized that Andraste's teachings could be cited to justify almost any political action, provided one selected the appropriate passages and interpreted them correctly. This realization led to increasingly sophisticated efforts to control both the text itself and its authoritative interpretation. The addition of new canticles to the original 4 represents one of the most controversial aspects of the Chant of Light's development. Over the centuries following its initial compilation, various religious authorities have attempted to add supplementary texts that address new theological questions or respond to contemporary challenges. Some of these additions gained widespread acceptance and became integral parts of the chant, while others were rejected as unauthorized corruptions of the original revelation. The dissonant verses represent perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this ongoing process of textual development. These are passages that were once included in accepted versions of the Chant of Light, but were later removed due to political or theological concerns. The Canticle of Chantry, for example, was excised following the Exalted March of the Dales, as its celebration of elven contributions to Andraste's mission became politically inconvenient for human-dominated religious authorities. The process of textual revision and reinterpretation that characterizes the Chant of Light's development reflects broader patterns within organized religion throughout Thedas. Sacred texts that begin as spiritual guidance for believers inevitably become political documents used to justify or challenge existing power structures. The ongoing debates about proper interpretation ensure that the Chant of Light remains a living document, constantly being reread and re-understood in light of contemporary circumstances. The educational and cultural impact of the Chant of Light extends far beyond its purely religious functions. In many regions of Thedas, learning to read begins with studying selected passages from the chant, making it the foundation of literacy for countless individuals. The moral and ethical teachings contained within its verses have shaped legal codes, social customs, and personal behavior throughout human-dominated regions of Thedas. The artistic influence of the Chant of Light can be seen in everything from architectural design to musical composition to visual arts. The imagery and themes contained within its verses have inspired countless works of art, while its poetic language has influenced literary traditions throughout Thedas. The Grand Cathedral in Valroyo, with its soaring architecture and elaborate decoration, represents perhaps the most magnificent attempt to translate the chant's spiritual vision into physical form. The rise of Kordillus Drakon, from prophet to institution. The transformation of Andrastian faith from a scattered collection of religious communities into the dominant institutional power of southern Thedas represents one of the most remarkable political and religious developments in the continent's history. At the center of this transformation stands Kordillus Drakon, the ambitious ruler whose vision of unified empire and organized religion would fundamentally reshape the political landscape of Thedas for centuries to come. Drakon's rise to power occurred during a period of significant political fragmentation in the region south of the Tevinter Imperium. The collapse of Andraste's coalition following her martyrdom had left a complex patchwork of competing tribal confederations, city-states, and local strongmen, each claiming some degree of legitimacy based on their connection to the prophet's legacy. This fragmented political landscape provided both opportunity and necessity for a leader capable of unifying these diverse communities under a single authority. Born to minor nobility in what would later become the heartland of Orlais, Drakon demonstrated from an early age the combination of military skill, political acumen, and religious conviction that would define his later achievements. His family's modest holdings provided him with enough resources to begin building a power base, but not so much wealth or prestige that his eventual success could be attributed merely to inherited advantage. The young Drakon's exposure to Andrastian teaching came through the dispersed communities of believers who had maintained their faith despite the absence of formal religious organization. These early encounters with authentic religious devotion would prove crucial in shaping his understanding of faith as both spiritual experience and political force. Unlike many contemporary rulers who viewed religion primarily as a tool for controlling populations, Drakon appears to have genuinely embraced Andrastian theology, while recognizing its enormous potential for creating unity among diverse communities. Drakon's military campaigns began as relatively modest affairs, focused on consolidating control over neighboring territories and establishing his reputation as an effective leader. However, these early conflicts revealed both his tactical brilliance and his innovative approach to conquest and governance. Rather than simply defeating his enemies and absorbing their lands, Drakon consistently sought to convert conquered populations to his cause through a combination of generous treatment and effective religious instruction. The integration of religious mission with military conquest became Drakon's signature approach to empire building. His armies carried not just weapons, but also copies of the Chant of Light, and his officers were trained to serve as both military commanders and religious instructors. This dual role created a unique form of imperial expansion that combined political control with spiritual conversion, ensuring that conquered territories would remain loyal not just through fear, but through genuine belief in the righteousness of Drakon's cause. The theological justification for Drakon's expansionist campaigns drew heavily on specific passages within the Chant of Light that spoke of the need to spread Andraste's teachings to all corners of the world. By positioning himself as the earthly instrument of divine will, Drakon transformed what might otherwise have been seen as naked aggression into sacred mission. His conquests became crusades, his enemies became obstacles to divine plan, and his empire became the earthly manifestation of the Maker's kingdom. The practical challenges of governing an increasingly diverse empire required Drakon to develop sophisticated approaches to religious and political administration. The various communities that joined his growing confederation brought with them different traditions, customs, and interpretations of Andrastian teaching. Rather than attempting to impose strict uniformity, Drakon initially adopted a relatively tolerant approach that allowed for local variation within a broader framework of shared fundamental beliefs. This pragmatic flexibility proved crucial to Drakon's success, as it enabled him to attract support from religious communities that might otherwise have resisted imperial control. Local religious leaders, who demonstrated their loyalty to the broader Andrastian mission, were often incorporated into Drakon's administrative structure, providing both legitimacy and practical knowledge about governing diverse populations. The development of what would eventually become the formal Chantry hierarchy began during this period, as Drakon recognized the need for standardized religious authority to complement his political control. The appointment of regional religious leaders answerable to central authority created a parallel structure of power that could operate independently of local political considerations while reinforcing imperial unity through shared religious conviction. Drakon's most significant innovation was his decision to establish a permanent religious capital that would serve as the spiritual center of his empire. The construction of the Grand Cathedral in what would become Val Royo represented far more than an impressive architectural achievement. It symbolized the permanent institutional foundation of organized Andrastian religion. This magnificent structure would serve as both the physical embodiment of imperial power and the spiritual heart of a faith that aspired to universal dominion. The theological implications of creating a permanent religious center were enormous. By establishing a fixed location for the highest religious authority, Drakon was essentially arguing that divine will could be institutionalized and administered through earthly bureaucracy. This represented a significant departure from the more spontaneous and personal approach to religious experience that had characterized early Andrastian communities. The selection of the first divine represented perhaps Drakon's most crucial decision in establishing the institutional Chantry. The choice of Justinia the Funan for this unprecedented position reflected both political calculation and genuine religious conviction. Justinia possessed the theological knowledge necessary to provide authoritative interpretation of the Chant of Light, while also demonstrating the administrative skills required to manage a complex religious bureaucracy. The establishment of the divine as the supreme religious authority created immediate theological questions about the relationship between earthly and divine authority, while the Chant of Light clearly established the Maker as the ultimate source of all legitimate power. The practical necessity of making decisions in the absence of direct divine communication required human interpretation and judgment. The divine's role as the earthly voice of divine will provided a solution to this theological dilemma, while creating new challenges related to the fallibility of human authority. The early relationship between Drakon and Justinian established patterns that would influence church-state relations throughout the subsequent history of the Chantry. While the emperor retained ultimate political authority over his empire, the divine's spiritual authority created a parallel center of power that could potentially challenge imperial decisions on religious grounds. The successful management of this relationship required constant negotiation and mutual respect between temporal and spiritual authority. The codification of Chantry doctrine during Justinian's tenure as divine represented a crucial step in the transformation of Andrastian faith from popular movement to institutional religion. The systematic organization of theological principles, ritual practices, and ecclesiastical hierarchy provided the foundation for uniform religious observance throughout Drakon's expanding empire. This standardization process inevitably involved choices about which traditions to preserve and which to modify or abandon. The compilation of the authoritative version of the Chant of Light during this period involved extensive scholarly work to reconcile various regional traditions and interpretations. The final text reflected not just theological considerations but also political necessities, as certain passages were emphasized or de-emphasized based on their utility for supporting imperial unity and religious authority. The establishment of formal training programs for religious personnel marked another crucial development in the institutionalization of the Chantry. Rather than relying on the informal transmission of religious knowledge that had characterized earlier Andrastian communities, the new institutional structure required systematic education for clergy members. These programs ensured both theological consistency and loyalty to central religious authority. The creation of the Circle of Magi during this period represented one of Drakon's most significant innovations in managing the complex relationship between religious authority and magical power. Rather than attempting to suppress magic entirely or allowing it to operate without oversight, the Circle provided a framework for incorporating mages into the broader religious and political structure of the empire, while maintaining strict supervision over their activities. The theological justification for the Circle drew on passages within the Chant of Light that spoke of magic as a gift that could serve divine purposes when properly directed. By positioning the Chantry as the appropriate authority for overseeing magical education and practice, Drakon created a system that acknowledged the reality of magical power while ensuring its subordination to religious authority. The military implications of organizing magical practitioners under religious supervision proved enormous. The integration of controlled magical support with conventional military forces gave Drakon's armies significant advantages over enemies who lacked similar organization. The religious framework for magical practice also helped address the theological concerns of troops who might otherwise have been reluctant to fight alongside practitioners of what had traditionally been viewed as suspect arts. The expansion of Drakon's empire through what he termed Exalted Marches established precedents that would influence Chantry policy for centuries to come. These campaigns were presented not as wars of conquest, but as religious missions aimed at bringing divine truth to populations that had been deceived by false teachings. The combination of military force with missionary activity created a powerful model for religious expansion that could be adapted to various circumstances. The success of these early Exalted Marches depended heavily on the ability to present military objectives in terms of religious necessity. Populations that might have resisted purely political conquest often proved more willing to accept absorption into an empire that promised spiritual benefits, along with political stability. The religious framework also provided justification for the complete transformation of conquered societies, as traditional practices could be condemned as heretical rather than merely different. The administrative challenges of governing an empire unified by religious conviction, rather than ethnic or cultural identity, required innovative approaches to law, taxation, and local governance. Drakon's solution involved creating overlapping systems of authority that reinforced each other while providing multiple channels for addressing local concerns. Religious officials often served as both spiritual guides and civil administrators, ensuring that imperial policy would be implemented with proper theological justification. The economic implications of Drakon's religious empire proved equally significant. The Chantry's emphasis on charitable work and social welfare created new models for addressing poverty and social instability, while the institution's growing wealth provided resources for large-scale public works projects. The construction of impressive religious architecture served both spiritual and economic purposes, providing employment while demonstrating the power and permanence of the new order. The cultural impact of Drakon's religious empire extended far beyond its immediate political boundaries. The standardization of religious practice, the promotion of literacy through religious education, and the patronage of arts and scholarship created a distinctive civilization that would influence developments throughout Thedas. The success of this model would inspire both imitation and opposition from other powers throughout the continent. The legal framework developed during Drakon's reign established important precedents for the relationship between religious law and civil authority. Rather than simply adopting existing tribal or imperial legal traditions, Drakon's administration developed new approaches to justice that incorporated Andrastian ethical principles while maintaining practical effectiveness. The result was a legal system that claimed divine authority while addressing the practical needs of governing a diverse empire. The succession arrangements established by Drakon reflected his understanding that the survival of his religious empire would depend on maintaining both political stability and religious legitimacy. The careful balance between hereditary succession and religious appointment ensured that future rulers would possess both the practical skills necessary for governance and the spiritual authority required to maintain the empire's religious character. The divine and the hierarchy. Structuring sacred authority. The establishment of the divine as the supreme religious authority within the Chantry represented far more than a simple administrative decision. It created an entirely new form of spiritual leadership that would shape religious and political developments throughout Thedas for over a millennium. The position's unique combination of theological authority, political influence, and symbolic significance transformed the divine into one of the most powerful figures in the known world, capable of influencing events far beyond the borders of any single nation. The theological foundation for the divine's authority rests on the Andrastian doctrine of divine revelation and earthly stewardship. According to Chantry teaching, the Maker's withdrawal from active involvement in worldly affairs created the necessity for human interpreters capable of discerning divine will through careful study of scripture and prayer. The divine, as the most spiritually advanced and theologically learned member of the religious hierarchy, serves as the primary conduit for divine guidance in the absence of direct heavenly communication. This theological framework created both enormous power and tremendous responsibility for those who occupied the position of divine. Unlike temporal rulers whose authority derived from inheritance, conquest, or political appointment, the divine's legitimacy depended entirely on perceived spiritual worthiness and theological competence. This requirement for genuine religious qualification helped ensure that occupants of the position possessed at least some degree of authentic spiritual commitment, while the political realities of selection and governance meant that practical skills remained equally important. The selection process for choosing new divines evolved significantly from the initial appointment of Justinia the Firm by Emperor Drakon to the complex electoral procedures that developed in later centuries. The Grand Clerics, as the highest-ranking religious officials below the divine herself gradually assumed responsibility for selecting new spiritual leaders when vacancies occurred. This development represented a crucial step toward religious independence from direct political control, though the political implications of divine selection ensured that temporal authorities continued to exercise significant informal influence. The electoral procedures that emerged for choosing divines reflected both democratic ideals and practical necessities. The requirement for consensus among Grand Clerics helped ensure that new divines would possess broad support within the religious hierarchy, while the lengthy deliberation processes allowed for careful consideration of candidates' qualifications and likely performance in office. However, the political pressures surrounding these elections often resulted in complex negotiations that had little to do with spiritual considerations. The symbolic and ceremonial aspects of the divine's office proved crucial in maintaining both religious authority and popular support. The elaborate rituals surrounding divine appointments, the magnificent regalia associated with the position, and the careful cultivation of an image of spiritual transcendence all contributed to public perception of the divine as genuinely different from ordinary political leaders. These symbolic elements helped maintain religious credibility even when particular divines proved disappointing in their actual performance. The practical powers exercised by the divine extended far beyond purely religious matters to encompass significant political and military authority. The right to declare Exalted Marches represented perhaps the most dramatic expression of divine power, as these religious crusades could mobilize entire armies and reshape the political landscape of entire regions. The divine's control over the vast resources of the Chantry, including its extensive land holdings, educational institutions, and charitable organizations, provided additional sources of influence that rivaled those of secular rulers. The relationship between successive divines and the broader Chantry hierarchy required careful management to maintain institutional unity while allowing for necessary adaptation to changing circumstances. Different divines brought different theological emphasis, administrative styles, and political priorities to their office, creating potential conflicts with subordinate religious officials who had developed their own approaches to religious leadership. The successful management of these relationships often determined whether particular divine reigns would be remembered as periods of growth and success, or division and conflict. The development of the Grand Cleric position as the primary subordinate rank within the Chantry hierarchy reflected both practical administrative needs and theological principles about distributed religious authority. Grand Clerics possessed significant autonomy within their assigned regions while remaining accountable to divine oversight, creating a system that could respond to local conditions while maintaining overall institutional coherence. The geographical distribution of Grand Cleric positions reflected political as well as religious considerations, as the Chantry worked to maintain influence throughout the territories where Andrastian faith had gained acceptance. The assignment of Grand Clerics to particular regions often involved complex negotiations with local political authorities, who recognized that religious appointments could significantly influence their own power and legitimacy. The educational and intellectual requirements for advancement within the Chantry hierarchy ensured that high-ranking religious officials possessed genuine expertise in theological matters, while also developing the administrative and political skills necessary for effective leadership. The extensive educational programs developed by the Chantry created a distinctive intellectual culture that influenced scholarship and learning throughout much of Thedas. The role of revered mothers within the broader hierarchical structure reflected the Chantry's unique approach to gender and religious authority. Unlike many religious traditions that restricted high-ranking positions to men, the Chantry's emphasis on female religious leadership created opportunities for women to exercise significant power and influence. This distinctive characteristic helped distinguish Andrastian faith from competing religious traditions, while providing practical advantages in terms of recruiting and maintaining clerical personnel. The relationship between the formal religious hierarchy and the various specialized organizations that developed within the broader Chantry structure required careful coordination to prevent conflicts and ensure effective collaboration. The Templar Order, the Seekers of Truth, and various scholarly and charitable organizations all possess their own internal hierarchies and operational procedures, while remaining ultimately accountable to divine authority. The Templar Order's unique position within the broader Chantry structure reflected the organization's crucial role in managing the complex relationship between religious authority and magical power. Templars served as both military force and theological police, responsible for enforcing Chantry doctrine regarding proper magical practice while providing physical security for religious institutions and personnel. The selection and training of Templars involved careful screening to identify individuals who possessed both the physical capabilities necessary for their military role and the spiritual strength required to resist demonic corruption. The extensive indoctrination programs developed for Templar training created a distinctive military culture that emphasized absolute loyalty to religious authority while maintaining effectiveness in combat against magical threats. The theological education provided to Templar recruits went far beyond simple religious instruction to encompass sophisticated understanding of magical theory, demonic influences, and spiritual warfare. This comprehensive education ensured that Templars could fulfill their role as theological enforcers while also serving as educators and counselors for mages under their supervision. The relationship between Templars and the Circle of Magi represented one of the most complex and controversial aspects of Chantry administration. The theoretical framework of protective supervision often conflicted with the practical realities of managing communities of powerful magical practitioners who possessed their own traditions, loyalties, and political interests. The success or failure of these relationships often depended on the personal qualities of individual Templars and mages rather than institutional policies. The Seekers of Truth emerged as an additional layer of oversight within the Chantry hierarchy, responsible for monitoring the Templars themselves and investigating potential corruption or abuse within religious institutions. This development reflected growing recognition that even religiously motivated organizations required internal accountability mechanisms to prevent the abuse of power and maintain institutional integrity. The educational institutions established by the Chantry served multiple functions within the broader religious and political landscape of Thedas. Beyond their obvious role in training clerical personnel, these institutions provided general education services that helped promote literacy and learning throughout Chantry-controlled territories. The standardization of educational curricula helped create shared cultural and intellectual foundations that supported broader political unity. The scholarly traditions that developed within Chantry educational institutions made significant contributions to knowledge and learning throughout Thedas. The preservation and copying of ancient texts, the development of theological commentary and analysis, and the encouragement of intellectual inquiry created a distinctive scholarly culture that influenced developments in law, philosophy, history, and natural philosophy. The charitable and welfare organizations operated by the Chantry provided crucial social services throughout much of Thedas, while also serving important political functions. The provision of food, shelter, medical care, and education to disadvantaged populations helped maintain popular support for religious authority, while also demonstrating the practical benefits of Andrastian faith. These charitable activities also provided opportunities for missionary work and religious conversion in areas where direct political control was not feasible. The economic activities of the Chantry hierarchy extended far beyond simple charitable work to encompass significant commercial and financial operations. The management of extensive landholdings, the operation of educational institutions, and the administration of charitable programs required sophisticated economic planning and management. The wealth generated by these activities provided resources for religious and political activities, while also creating potential conflicts of interest between spiritual and material concerns. The international dimensions of Chantry hierarchy reflected the organization's aspirations to universal religious authority. The maintenance of religious contacts and influence throughout Thedas required careful diplomatic activity that often paralleled or conflicted with the foreign policy objectives of particular secular governments. The Divine's claim to spiritual authority over all Andrastian believers created complex relationships with political leaders who might support the faith while resisting external religious control. The Circle of Magi, magic under divine authority. The establishment of the Circle of Magi represents one of the most complex and controversial achievements of the early Chantry, creating an institutional framework for managing magical practitioners that would influence the relationship between religion, magic, and political authority throughout Thedas for centuries to come. This institution emerged from the recognition that magical power, while potentially dangerous and theologically problematic, remained too useful and too widespread to be eliminated entirely from organized society. The theological foundation for the Circle's creation drew heavily on specific passages within the Chant of Light that addressed the proper relationship between divine authority and magical practice. Rather than condemning magic as inherently evil, these teachings emphasized the spiritual dangers that accompanied the pursuit of magical power, particularly the vulnerability of mages to demonic influence through their connection to the Fade. The Circle was conceived as a solution that would allow society to benefit from magical knowledge while minimizing the associated spiritual risks. The early development of the Circle required extensive negotiation between religious authorities, political leaders, and existing communities of magical practitioners. Many mages initially resisted the new institutional framework, viewing it as an attempt to restrict their traditional autonomy and subject them to oversight by non-magical authorities. The success of the Circle's establishment depended on convincing these practitioners that cooperation would provide them with protection and resources while allowing them to continue their magical studies within acceptable theological boundaries. The physical infrastructure developed for Circle institutions reflected both practical and symbolic considerations. The tower-like structures that became characteristic of Circle architecture served obvious defensive purposes, protecting both mages and surrounding communities from potential magical disasters. However, these buildings also functioned as powerful symbols of the Chantry's authority over magical practice, with their prominent religious iconography and Templar guards making clear the institutional framework within which magical learning was expected to occur. The educational programs developed within Circle institutions represented a significant advancement in the systematic study and teaching of magical theory and practice. Rather than relying on the informal apprenticeship systems that had previously characterized magical education, the Circle created standardized curricula that ensured all mages would receive comprehensive training in both practical magical techniques and the theological principles that governed their proper use. The integration of religious instruction with magical education proved crucial to the Circle's theoretical foundation. Mages were required to study not just the technical aspects of spellcasting, but also the spiritual implications of their abilities and the moral responsibilities that accompanied magical power. This comprehensive approach was designed to create magical practitioners who understood their place within the broader religious and social order while possessing the knowledge necessary to use their abilities responsibly. The hierarchical structure that developed within Circle institutions reflected both academic and religious principles. The progression from apprentice to senior enchanter provided clear pathways for advancement based on demonstrated competence and spiritual maturity. The requirement that high-ranking Circle members demonstrate not just magical ability, but also theological understanding, ensured that institutional leadership would remain compatible with broader Chantry doctrine. The relationship between Circle mages and Templar overseers represented one of the most delicate and frequently problematic aspects of the entire institutional framework. While Templars were theoretically present to provide protection and guidance rather than simple surveillance, the practical realities of managing communities of powerful magical practitioners often created tensions between religious authority and magical autonomy. The success of individual Circle institutions frequently depended on the personal relationships that developed between Templar commanders and Circle leadership. The harrowing ritual that became central to Circle practice embodied the theological principles underlying the entire institution. This dangerous test of spiritual strength and magical competence served multiple functions simultaneously. It identified mages who possessed sufficient strength to resist demonic corruption. It provided a dramatic demonstration of the spiritual dangers associated with magical practice, and it created a shared experience that bound successful mages to the Circle community and its governing principles. The theological significance of the harrowing extended far beyond its practical utility as a testing mechanism. The ritual's emphasis on spiritual strength over magical power reinforced Chantry teaching about the proper relationship between divine authority and worldly abilities. Mages who survived the harrowing had demonstrated not just their magical competence, but their spiritual worthiness to continue practicing their art within the religious framework established by the Chantry. The development of specialized magical disciplines within Circle institutions created new opportunities for scholarly and practical advancement while maintaining compatibility with religious doctrine. The study of healing magic, for example, could be easily reconciled with Andrastian emphasis on compassion and service to others. Similarly, the development of protective and defensive magical techniques aligned with the Chantry's mission of safeguarding the faithful from spiritual and physical threats. The research activities conducted within Circle institutions made significant contributions to magical knowledge while remaining within acceptable theological boundaries. The systematic study of magical theory, the development of new spells and techniques, and the preservation of ancient magical texts created a distinctive scholarly tradition that advanced understanding of magical principles while maintaining appropriate religious oversight. The relationship between Circle institutions and the broader communities within which they were located required careful management to prevent conflicts between magical practitioners and ordinary citizens. The Chantry's emphasis on magical service to the community helped address popular concerns about the presence of powerful mages, while providing practical benefits that demonstrated the value of the Circle system. The economic activities of Circle institutions extended beyond simple magical services to encompass significant contributions to local and regional economies. The production of magical items, the provision of specialized services, and the consumption of goods and materials necessary for magical research created substantial economic relationships that helped integrate Circle communities into broader social and commercial networks. The international dimensions of the Circle system reflected the Chantry's broader aspirations to religious and political influence throughout Thedas. The establishment of Circle institutions in multiple regions created networks of magical practitioners who shared common training, values, and institutional loyalties. These networks provided the Chantry with additional sources of influence while creating new mechanisms for spreading Andrastian doctrine and practices. The military applications of organized magical practitioners proved crucial to the Chantry's political and military success. The ability to deploy mages, who had received standardized training and shared religious indoctrination, provided significant advantages in conflicts with enemies who lacked similar institutional frameworks for organizing magical support. The theological justification for using magical power in service of religious authority helped address potential concerns about the propriety of magical warfare. The relationship between Circle institutions and the broader Chantry hierarchy required ongoing negotiation and adjustment as both organizations evolved and adapted to changing circumstances. The tension between magical autonomy and religious authority created potential conflicts that could only be resolved through careful attention to both practical necessities and theological principles. The legal framework governing Circle operations established important precedents for the relationship between religious authority and specialized professional communities. The balance between institutional autonomy and external oversight created models that would influence the development of other professional organizations while maintaining the Chantry's ultimate authority over matters of spiritual significance. The social and cultural impact of the Circle system extended far beyond its immediate effects on magical practitioners to influence broader attitudes toward learning, expertise, and institutional authority. The success of the Circle in creating disciplined and socially useful magical practitioners helped legitimize the Chantry's claims to educational and intellectual authority while demonstrating the benefits of organized professional training. The challenges and controversies that emerged within the Circle system reflected broader tensions within Andrastian society between individual freedom and institutional authority. The debates over proper magical practice, the extent of Templar oversight, and the relationship between magical and religious authority would continue throughout the Circle's history, creating ongoing opportunities for reform and adaptation while maintaining the institution's essential character. The Exalted Marches, Holy War, and religious expansion. The Exalted Marches represent the most dramatic and controversial expression of Chantry power throughout the history of Thedas, transforming religious conviction into military force capable of reshaping entire regions and civilizations. These religious crusades, declared by divine authority and fought by armies convinced of their spiritual righteousness, demonstrate both the tremendous unifying power of organized faith and the terrible dangers that accompany the militarization of religious conviction. The theological foundation for Exalted Marches drew heavily on specific passages within the Chant of Light that spoke of the necessity of spreading Andraste's teachings to all corners of the world. The doctrine of universal salvation through Andrastian faith created an imperative for active missionary work, while the reality of resistance to religious conversion provided justification for the use of force when peaceful persuasion proved ineffective. The result was a theological framework that could transform military aggression into sacred duty. The first Exalted March, that of Andraste herself against the Tevinter Imperium, provided the archetypal model for all subsequent religious crusades. Andraste's campaign combined liberation of the oppressed with punishment of those who had corrupted divine truth, creating a narrative template that could be adapted to various circumstances and enemies. The success of Andraste's initial campaign, despite her ultimate martyrdom, provided both inspiration and justification for later religious warfare. The declaration of an Exalted March represented the most solemn and significant act that a divine could perform, requiring not just personal conviction, but consultation with the broader Chantry hierarchy and careful consideration of practical as well as spiritual factors. The theological requirements for justifying religious warfare ensured that Exalted Marches could not be declared lightly or for purely political purposes, though the interpretation of these requirements often proved flexible enough to accommodate various strategic objectives. The mobilization of forces for Exalted Marches revealed the extraordinary reach and influence of the Chantry throughout Andrastian territories. The Divine's call to holy war could draw volunteers from across multiple nations and regions, creating armies that transcended normal political boundaries and represented the unified power of religious conviction. The participation of nobility, commoners, and clergy in these campaigns demonstrated the broad appeal of religious warfare among populations that shared Andrastian faith. The military organization of Exalted March armies reflected both practical necessities and religious principles. The integration of professional soldiers with religious volunteers required careful attention to command structures, supply systems, and tactical coordination. The presence of clergy and religious officials within military units served both spiritual and practical functions, providing moral guidance while also ensuring that military activities remained consistent with religious objectives. The Second Exalted March, directed against the elven kingdom of the Dales, established important precedents for how religious crusades would interact with questions of race, culture, and political sovereignty. The theological justification for this campaign focused on the elves' refusal to abandon their traditional religious practices in favor of Andrastian faith, but the practical consequences involved the complete destruction of elven political independence and the relegation of elven populations to subordinate status within human-dominated societies. The complexity of the Dales conflict reflected broader tensions within Andrastian theology regarding the treatment of non-human populations. While the Chant of Light spoke of universal salvation and the fundamental equality of all souls, the practical realities of implementing religious authority often involved the suppression of competing cultural and religious traditions. The Exalted March of the Dales demonstrated how theological principles could be interpreted to justify policies that served obvious political and economic interests. The aftermath of the Dales campaign revealed both the military effectiveness of Exalted Marches and their problematic long-term consequences. The complete victory achieved by Chantry forces demonstrated the organization's capacity for sustained military action and effective coordination of diverse armies. However, the treatment of defeated elven populations created lasting resentments and ongoing security problems that would influence regional politics for centuries to come. The series of Exalted Marches directed against the imperial Chantry of Tevinter represented a different category of religious warfare, involving conflicts between competing interpretations of the same basic religious tradition, rather than struggles between entirely different faiths. These campaigns reflected the Chantry's refusal to accept theological pluralism within Andrastian tradition, insisting that only the Orlesian interpretation of the Chant of Light represented authentic divine truth. The theological disputes that motivated the Tevinter Marches involved fundamental questions about the nature of divine authority, the proper interpretation of Scripture, and the relationship between religious and political power. The imperial Chantry's acceptance of male religious leadership and its more tolerant attitude toward magical practice directly challenged core doctrines of the Orlesian Chantry, creating irreconcilable theological differences that could only be resolved through force. The military outcomes of the Tevinter Marches proved far less decisive than those achieved in the Dales, reflecting both the greater military capabilities of the Tevinter Imperium and the complex political dynamics involved in religious civil war. The survival of the imperial Chantry, despite sustained military pressure, demonstrated the limits of religious warfare when directed against enemies who possessed comparable military resources and equally strong religious convictions. The new Exalted Marches against the Kunari represented yet another category of religious warfare, involving conflicts between the Chantry and a completely alien philosophical and social system. The Kunari's rigid social organization and their systematic approach to cultural conversion posed unprecedented challenges to Andrastian missionary activity, while their military effectiveness created serious threats to established political and religious authority throughout northern Thedas. The coordination between the Orlesian and imperial Chantries during the Kunari conflicts demonstrated the potential for religious cooperation in the face of external threats, temporarily overcoming theological differences in service of shared defensive objectives. This collaboration provided a model for future religious diplomacy, while also highlighting the pragmatic considerations that often influenced supposedly spiritual decisions. The military innovations that emerged during the various Exalted Marches had lasting effects on warfare throughout Thedas. The integration of magical support with conventional forces, the development of specialized siege techniques, and the creation of coordinated multinational armies all represented significant advances in military organization and tactics. These innovations influenced military development, even in regions and conflicts that had little direct connection to religious warfare. The economic impact of Exalted Marches extended far beyond the immediate costs of military campaigns to encompass significant effects on trade, production, and resource allocation throughout much of Thedas. The mobilization of large armies required substantial investments in equipment, supplies, and logistics, while the disruption of normal economic activities created both opportunities and challenges for various commercial interests. The cultural and social consequences of the Exalted Marches influenced religious and political developments throughout Thedas for centuries after the conclusion of specific campaigns. The experiences of military service in religious causes created shared identities and loyalties that transcended normal political boundaries, while the stories and legends that emerged from these conflicts provided inspiration for future generations of believers. The legal and diplomatic precedents established by the Exalted Marches had lasting effects on international relations throughout Thedas. The assertion of religious authority over political sovereignty created new forms of international law and diplomacy, while the practical experiences of coordinating multinational religious armies provided models for future collaborative military efforts. The theological debates that emerged from the various Exalted Marches continued to influence Chantry doctrine and practice long after the conclusion of specific conflicts. Questions about the proper use of religious authority, the relationship between spiritual and temporal power, and the appropriate methods for spreading divine truth remained contentious issues that would shape religious development throughout the subsequent history of the Chantry. The regional variations in support for and participation in Exalted Marches revealed important differences in religious commitment and political loyalty throughout Andrastian territories. The willingness of different populations to contribute to religious warfare provided indicators of both spiritual devotion and practical political calculation, creating intelligence that would influence future Chantry policies and strategies. The artistic and literary traditions that emerged from the Exalted Marches created lasting cultural legacies that continue to influence popular understanding of religious and military virtue throughout Thedas. The songs, stories, and visual representations that commemorated these campaigns provided models of heroic behavior while also reinforcing particular interpretations of religious duty and spiritual achievement. The schism, or Orlesian versus Imperial Chantry. The fundamental division between the Orlesian Chantry and the Imperial Chantry of Tevinter represents one of the most significant religious and political developments in the history of Thedas, creating competing centers of spiritual authority that would influence continental politics for centuries. This schism emerged not from minor theological disagreements, but from irreconcilable differences regarding the most basic questions of religious doctrine, institutional organization, and the proper relationship between spiritual and temporal power. The origins of this division can be traced to the earliest attempts to establish unified Andrastian authority throughout Thedas. When the Chantry sought to extend its influence into the Tevinter Imperium, it encountered a society with fundamentally different attitudes toward magic, social hierarchy, and religious authority. The Imperium's long-standing tradition of magocracy, where magical ability determined social status and political power, created immediate conflicts with Chantry doctrine regarding the proper subordination of magical practice to religious oversight. The theological disputes that drove the schism centered primarily on competing interpretations of Andraste's nature and message. The Orlesian Chantry maintained that Andraste was the chosen bride of the Maker, granted divine authority through her unique spiritual relationship with the Creator. This interpretation emphasized her role as a perfect conduit for divine revelation, making her teachings authoritative precisely because of their supernatural origin rather than their human wisdom. The Imperial Chantry's rejection of this interpretation struck at the heart of Orlesian theological authority. By arguing that Andraste was simply an extraordinarily gifted mage rather than a divinely chosen prophet, Tevinter scholars challenged the entire foundation of Chantry claims to exclusive religious legitimacy. If Andraste's authority derived from her magical abilities rather than divine selection, then other powerful mages might possess equally valid claims to religious leadership. The practical implications of these theological differences proved enormous. The Orlesian Chantry's insistence on the subordination of magic to religious authority required the systematic regulation of magical practice through institutions like the Circle of Magi. The Imperial Chantry's acceptance of mages as legitimate religious leaders created an entirely different model of spiritual authority that celebrated rather than constrained magical ability. The organizational structures that emerged from these competing theological visions reflected their fundamental differences regarding the proper relationship between magical and religious authority. The Orlesian Chantry's exclusion of men from high religious office and its systematic subordination of mages to non-magical oversight created a hierarchical system that prioritized spiritual purity over practical ability. The Imperial Chantry's inclusion of male clergy and its acceptance of mage priests created more flexible institutional arrangements that could adapt to various practical necessities. The gender dynamics that distinguished the two chantries reflected deeper theological differences about the nature of spiritual authority and divine communication. The Orlesian tradition's emphasis on female religious leadership drew on specific interpretations of Andraste's example and particular passages within the Chant of Light that emphasized women's supposedly greater spiritual sensitivity. The Imperial Chantry's more egalitarian approach reflected different theological priorities that emphasized practical competence over symbolic purity. The political implications of the schism extended far beyond purely religious matters to encompass fundamental questions about sovereignty, international relations, and the proper role of religious institutions in secular governance. The Orlesian Chantry's claims to universal authority created ongoing tensions with the political independence of the Tevinter Imperium, while the Imperial Chantry's acceptance of limited regional authority allowed for more flexible accommodation with existing political structures. The military conflicts that resulted from the schism demonstrated both the political importance of religious unity and the practical limitations of religious warfare when directed against well-organized and highly motivated opponents. The series of Exalted Marches directed against Tevinter achieved limited success despite substantial investments of military resources and religious conviction, revealing the difficulties inherent in imposing religious authority on populations that possessed both the means and motivation to resist. The economic consequences of the schism created lasting patterns of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange that would influence continental development for centuries. The religious division between Orlais and Tevinter contributed to broader patterns of political and economic competition, while the need to maintain separate religious institutions created substantial costs for both organizations. The Imperial Chantry's smaller resource base required more efficient administration and closer integration with secular authorities, while the Orlesian Chantry's greater wealth enabled more ambitious projects, but also created greater administrative challenges. The intellectual and scholarly traditions that developed within the competing chantries reflected their different theological priorities and institutional constraints. The Orlesian Chantry's emphasis on doctrinal purity and religious authority created scholarly traditions that prioritized theological consistency and institutional loyalty. The imperial chantry's greater tolerance for theological innovation and practical experimentation enabled more diverse scholarly activities, but also created greater potential for doctrinal confusion and institutional fragmentation. The diplomatic relationships that emerged between the two chantries demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of religious diplomacy in managing political conflicts. Despite their fundamental theological disagreements, both organizations recognized the practical benefits of occasional cooperation when facing external threats or shared challenges. The coordination during the Qunari conflicts provided the most dramatic example of such cooperation, temporarily overcoming centuries of hostility in service of mutual survival. The cultural impact of the schism extended far beyond purely religious matters to influence literature, art, architecture, and popular culture throughout much of Thedas. The competing religious traditions created different aesthetic sensibilities and cultural priorities, while the ongoing conflicts between them provided inspiration for countless works of art, literature, and historical scholarship. The distinctive cultural achievements of both traditions enriched the broader civilization of Thedas, while also reinforcing the divisions that separated them. The theological developments that emerged from centuries of competition between the chantries created increasingly sophisticated and nuanced interpretations of Andrastian doctrine. The need to defend their respective positions against intelligent and knowledgeable opponents forced scholars within both traditions to develop more rigorous and comprehensive theological systems. These intellectual achievements contributed to the overall sophistication of Andrastian thought, while also making reconciliation increasingly difficult as positions became more entrenched and systematized. The missionary activities conducted by both chantries in regions beyond their primary spheres of influence created additional sources of competition and conflict. The competition for converts in neutral territories forced both organizations to develop more effective methods of religious instruction and cultural adaptation, while the presence of competing Andrastian missions often confused local populations and created opportunities for political manipulation by secular authorities. The legal and institutional precedents established by the schism influenced religious and political development throughout Thedas. The recognition that religious authority could be legitimately divided created new possibilities for religious innovation and institutional experimentation, while the practical experiences of managing competing religious claims provided models for resolving similar conflicts in other contexts. Templars and Seekers, the Chantry's military arms, the development of the Templar Order, and the Seekers of Truth as specialized military and investigative arms of the Chantry represents one of the most significant innovations in religious organization throughout the history of Thedas. These institutions emerged from the practical recognition that spiritual authority required physical protection and institutional oversight to maintain its effectiveness in a world where religious conviction often conflicted with political interests and magical power. The Templar Order's origins can be traced to the early recognition that the Chantry's growing influence over magical practitioners would require specialized military support capable of dealing with supernatural threats. The unique challenges posed by mages, their ability to summon demons, manipulate minds, and unleash destructive magical forces, demanded military responses that went far beyond conventional warfare. The Templars emerged as a solution that combined religious devotion with specialized training in anti-magical combat techniques. The theological foundation for the Templar Order drew heavily on specific passages within the Chant of Light that spoke of the need to protect the faithful from spiritual corruption and supernatural threats. The Order's mission was conceived not as simple military service, but as a form of religious vocation that required both physical courage and spiritual strength. This theological framework helped ensure that Templars would possess the religious commitment necessary for their demanding and dangerous duties. The recruitment processes developed for the Templar Order reflected both practical necessities and religious principles. candidates were required to demonstrate not just physical capability and military potential, but also genuine religious conviction and moral strength. The extensive screening procedures helped ensure that only individuals with appropriate spiritual qualifications would be granted the authority and responsibility that came with Templar status. The training programs established for Templar recruits represented a unique synthesis of military education, religious instruction, and specialized preparation for anti-magical warfare. The physical conditioning required for Templar service went far beyond normal military training to include specific techniques for combating magical opponents and resisting supernatural influences. The religious education provided to recruits encompassed not just general Chantry doctrine, but detailed instruction in the theology of spiritual warfare and the proper use of divinely sanctioned violence. The lyrium treatments that became central to Templar capabilities created both enormous advantages and serious long-term costs for the Order's members. The regular consumption of lyrium enhanced Templars' natural resistance to magical influence, while also providing them with supernatural abilities that could counter magical attacks. However, the physical and psychological dependence that resulted from lyrium use created significant personal costs for individual Templars, while also making the Order dependent on continued access to this valuable and limited resource. The relationship between Templars and the mages they were assigned to supervise represented one of the most complex and frequently problematic aspects of Chantry administration. The theoretical framework of protective oversight often conflicted with the practical realities of managing communities of intelligent and powerful individuals who possessed their own professional identities and institutional loyalties. The success of Templar-Mage relationships often depended more on personal compatibility and individual judgment than on institutional policies or official procedures. The military capabilities that Templars developed for anti-magical warfare proved valuable in contexts that extended far beyond their primary mission of overseeing mages. The Order's specialized training and supernatural abilities made Templars effective opponents against demons, undead, and other supernatural threats that conventional military forces could not handle effectively. This broader utility helped justify the substantial investments required to maintain the Order, while also creating additional opportunities for demonstrating the practical value of religious authority. The institutional culture that developed within the Templar Order reflected both military traditions and religious values, creating a distinctive organizational identity that emphasized duty, sacrifice, and absolute loyalty to religious authority. The Order's emphasis on personal discipline and moral purity created high standards for individual behavior, while also fostering strong bonds of mutual support and institutional loyalty among its members. The Seekers of Truth emerged as a response to growing recognition that even religiously motivated institutions required internal oversight and accountability mechanisms to prevent corruption and abuse of power. The Seekers' mission encompassed both investigation of potential wrongdoing within Chantry institutions and broader intelligence-gathering activities that supported the organization's political and strategic objectives. The theological justification for the Seekers' activities drew on Chantry, teaching about the importance of truth and the dangers of corruption within religious institutions. The Seekers were positioned as guardians of institutional integrity, responsible for ensuring that the Chantry's various organizations remain true to their religious missions and free from the corrupting influences of worldly power and personal ambition. The selection criteria for Seeker recruitment emphasized different qualities than those required for Templar service, focusing on intellectual ability, investigative skills, and psychological resilience rather than physical combat capability. The Seekers' mission required individuals who could operate independently in complex and potentially dangerous situations, while maintaining absolute loyalty to religious authority and institutional objectives. The training programs developed for Seeker recruits encompass not just investigative techniques and intelligence-gathering methods, but also sophisticated education in theology, law, and political analysis. The broad scope of Seeker responsibilities required comprehensive preparation that went far beyond simple military or police training to include the skills necessary for conducting complex investigations and making difficult judgments about institutional policies and individual behavior. The relationship between the Seekers and other Chantry organizations created complex dynamics of oversight and accountability that required careful management to maintain institutional effectiveness while preventing destructive conflicts. The Seekers' authority to investigate other Chantry institutions potentially created tensions with the organizations being monitored, while their independence from normal hierarchical control raised questions about their own accountability and oversight. The intelligence gathering activities conducted by the Seekers provided the Chantry with crucial information about political developments, potential threats, and opportunities for expanding religious influence throughout Thedas. This intelligence capability enhanced the organization's ability to make informed strategic decisions, while also creating ethical questions about the proper limits of religious surveillance and intervention in secular affairs. The coordination between Templars and Seekers in joint operations demonstrated both the potential benefits and practical challenges of maintaining multiple specialized organizations within the same institutional framework. The different training, capabilities, and organizational cultures of the two groups created both opportunities for complementary cooperation and potential sources of conflict and competition. The legal and political status of both the Templars and Seekers within the broader political landscape of Thedas required ongoing negotiation and adjustment as religious and secular authorities worked to define appropriate spheres of activity and authority. The extraterritorial privileges claimed by both organizations sometimes conflicted with local laws and political interests, creating diplomatic challenges that required careful management to maintain effective relationships with secular governments. The economic resources required to maintain both the Templar Order and the Seekers of Truth represented substantial investments that reflected the Chantry's commitment to institutional security and effectiveness. The costs associated with recruitment, training, equipment, and ongoing operations required sophisticated financial planning and resource allocation, while the economic benefits provided by these organizations' activities had to be weighed against their substantial costs. The cultural impact of the Templars and Seekers extended far beyond their immediate institutional functions to influence popular perceptions of religious authority, military service, and the proper relationship between spiritual and temporal power. The visible presence of these organizations throughout Chantry territories served as constant reminders of religious authority, while also providing reassurance to believers and deterrence to potential opponents. The international dimensions of Templar and Seeker activities reflected the Chantry's broader aspirations to continental influence and authority. The deployment of these specialized forces beyond the borders of friendly nations created diplomatic challenges, while also demonstrating the organization's commitment to protecting its interests and advancing its objectives throughout Thedas. The political power of faith, church and state relations. The relationship between the Chantry and secular political authorities throughout Thedas represents one of the most complex and dynamic aspects of continental politics, creating ongoing negotiations between spiritual and temporal power that have shaped the development of nations, laws, and international relations for over a millennium. The Chantry's claim to divine authority and universal jurisdiction inevitably conflicts with the practical necessities of secular governance, creating tensions that require constant management and periodic resolution through political accommodation or open conflict. The theoretical foundation for Chantry political involvement rests on the theological principle that all legitimate authority derives ultimately from divine sources. making religious oversight of secular governance not just appropriate, but necessary for ensuring just and moral rule. This doctrine creates an inherent tension between religious claims to ultimate authority and political leaders' practical need for autonomous decision-making power in matters of governance, diplomacy, and military strategy. The historical development of church-state relations varied significantly across different regions of Thedas, reflecting local political traditions, the strength of religious commitment among various populations, and the practical capabilities of both religious and secular institutions. In Orlais, the close historical connection between the empire's founding and the Chantry's establishment created particularly intimate relationships between religious and political authority, while in other regions, the Chantry's influence developed more gradually and faced greater resistance from established political traditions. The mechanisms through which the Chantry exercised political influence encompassed both direct intervention in governmental decisions and indirect pressure through control over public opinion, economic resources, and access to specialized services. The organization's vast educational network, charitable activities, and cultural institutions provided multiple channels for influencing political developments, while its control over religious legitimacy gave it powerful leverage in societies where popular support depended heavily on perceived divine approval. The divine's role as both spiritual leader and political actor created unique challenges for maintaining the Chantry's religious credibility while pursuing practical political objectives. The tension between prophetic witness and political pragmatism required careful navigation to avoid compromising either the organization's spiritual authority or its political effectiveness. Different divines approached this challenge with varying degrees of success, some emphasizing spiritual purity at the cost of political influence, while others prioritized practical achievement despite potential damage to religious credibility. The Chantry's economic resources provided substantial foundation for its political influence, enabling the organization to support friendly governments, fund military campaigns, and provide crucial services that secular authorities might otherwise struggle to deliver. The management of extensive land holdings, commercial enterprises, and charitable operations required sophisticated economic planning that often involved close cooperation with secular authorities, while also creating potential conflicts of interest between spiritual and material concerns. The legal frameworks that governed church-state relations evolved gradually through centuries of negotiation, conflict, and accommodation between religious and secular authorities. The development of concepts like religious sanctuary, clerical immunity, and ecclesiastical jurisdiction created parallel systems of authority that required careful coordination to prevent destructive conflicts while maintaining appropriate spheres of autonomy for both religious and political institutions. The international dimensions of the Chantry's political involvement created additional complexities as the organization's claims to universal authority conflicted with the practical realities of national sovereignty and international law. The divine's ability to declare exalted marches that could mobilize armies across national boundaries represented perhaps the most dramatic expression of religious power over secular political authority, while also creating enormous potential for diplomatic conflict and military confrontation. The role of the Chantry in matters of succession and legitimacy proved crucial in societies where political authority depended heavily on popular acceptance and divine approval. The organization's ability to grant or withhold religious blessing for new rulers, dynastic changes, and territorial acquisitions provided powerful leverage in political disputes, while also creating expectations for reciprocal support and accommodation in matters of religious policy. The Chantry's involvement in legal and judicial matters reflected both its theological concerns with justice and morality and its practical interests in maintaining institutional privileges and protecting its members from secular persecution. The development of ecclesiastical courts with jurisdiction over religious personnel and matters involving church law created parallel legal systems that sometimes conflicted with secular judicial authority, while providing additional protections for religious institutions and their activities. The management of conflicts between religious and secular law required sophisticated legal scholarship and diplomatic negotiation to develop workable compromises that respected both spiritual principles and practical governmental necessities. The resolution of jurisdictional disputes often depended more on political power and negotiating skill than on abstract legal principles, creating precedents that would influence future church-state relations, while also establishing the importance of maintaining effective working relationships between religious and political leadership. The Chantry's role in matters of war and peace extended far beyond the dramatic declarations of Exalted Marches to encompass ongoing diplomatic activity, intelligence gathering, and conflict mediation. The organization's international connections and moral authority provided valuable resources for conducting diplomatic negotiations, while its theological expertise in questions of just war and moral conduct offered guidance for political leaders facing difficult decisions about military action and peace settlements. The cultural and educational activities sponsored by the Chantry created additional channels for political influence, while also providing genuine benefits to the societies within which the organization operated. The establishment of schools, libraries, and centers of learning helped promote literacy and intellectual development, while also ensuring that educated elites would be familiar with Chantry doctrine and sympathetic to religious perspectives on political and social questions. The Chantry's charitable and welfare activities provided crucial social services, while also demonstrating the practical benefits of religious authority and creating networks of popular support that could be mobilized for political purposes when necessary. The organization's ability to provide food, shelter, medical care, and other essential services during times of crisis often proved more important than military force in maintaining political stability and popular loyalty. The relationship between the Chantry and military institutions reflected both cooperation and competition between religious and secular authorities for control over armed force and military policy. The Templar Order's loyalty to religious rather than political authority created potential conflicts with secular military organizations, while the Chantry's ability to inspire religious warfare sometimes provided crucial support for secular military objectives and sometimes created unwanted complications and constraints. The evolution of church-state relations over time reflected changing political circumstances, theological developments, and practical adaptations to new challenges and opportunities. The rise of new political movements, the emergence of competing religious authorities, and the development of new forms of military and economic power all required adjustments in the traditional balance between spiritual and temporal authority. The regional variations in church-state relations throughout Thedas created different models for managing the relationship between religious and secular authority, providing examples and precedents that influenced political development in other regions. The success or failure of different approaches to church-state cooperation provided valuable lessons for political leaders and religious authorities throughout the continent. Religious persecution and social control. The Chantry's exercise of spiritual authority throughout Thedas frequently involved systematic efforts to suppress competing religious traditions, control dissent, and maintain social order through the application of religious doctrine to matters of law, social policy, and cultural practice. These activities, while justified through theological arguments about spiritual truth and divine will, often resulted in substantial human suffering and the destruction of ancient cultural traditions that had provided meaning and identity for countless communities throughout the continent. The theological foundation for religious persecution rested on the Chantry's claim to exclusive possession of divine truth and its interpretation of the Chant of Light's call to spread Andrastian faith to all corners of the world. This doctrinal framework created an imperative not just for missionary activity, but for the active suppression of competing religious traditions that were seen as obstacles to spiritual salvation and divine reconciliation. The result was a systematic campaign against alternative forms of religious expression that continued for centuries. The persecution of elven religious traditions represents perhaps the most sustained and comprehensive example of the Chantry's approach to religious control. The ancient elven pantheon, with its sophisticated theology and deep cultural significance, posed a direct challenge to Andrastian claims about the nature of divinity and the proper relationship between mortals and divine authority. The systematic destruction of elven religious sites, the suppression of traditional ceremonies, and the forced conversion of elven populations demonstrated the lengths to which religious authorities would go to eliminate competing spiritual traditions. The methods employed in suppressing elven religion encompassed both direct violence and subtle cultural manipulation designed to undermine traditional beliefs while making resistance increasingly difficult and dangerous. The destruction of ancient temples and sacred groves eliminated physical centers of religious practice, while the prohibition of traditional languages and customs made it increasingly difficult to transmit religious knowledge across generations. The creation of alienages and other forms of social segregation further isolated elven communities, while making them more vulnerable to continued pressure for religious conversion. The treatment of dwarven religious traditions revealed different but equally systematic approaches to religious control. The dwarven veneration of the stone and their ancestral worship posed less direct theological challenges to Andrastian doctrine than elven polytheism, but their existence as alternative spiritual traditions still required suppression according to Chantry teaching. The underground nature of dwarven society provided some protection from direct religious persecution, but the economic and political pressures applied by the Chantry created powerful incentives for individual conversion and gradual abandonment of traditional practices. The persecution of magical practitioners who refused to accept Chantry oversight represented another significant category of religious persecution, though one that was often justified through claims about public safety rather than purely theological concerns. The systematic hunting of apostates and maleficars demonstrated the Chantry's determination to maintain complete control over magical practice, while the harsh punishments imposed on those who violated religious restrictions on magic served as powerful deterrents to potential resistance. The development of the Templar Order as a specialized force for religious persecution reflected the institutional sophistication that the Chantry brought to the task of maintaining religious control. The extensive training programs, specialized equipment, and systematic procedures developed for hunting and capturing religious dissidents created a formidable apparatus for suppressing alternative spiritual traditions. The religious justification provided for Templar activities helped ensure that persecution would be conducted with the conviction and determination necessary for long-term success. The legal frameworks developed to support religious persecution created systematic procedures for identifying, prosecuting, and punishing various forms of religious dissent. The establishment of ecclesiastical courts with broad jurisdiction over matters involving religious law enabled the Chantry to bypass secular legal protections while ensuring that religious offences would be prosecuted with appropriate theological rigour. The development of detailed classifications of heretical beliefs and practices provided guidelines for consistent application of religious law, while also expanding the scope of potentially punishable offences. The social mechanisms through which religious persecution was implemented often involved the mobilization of popular religious sentiment against targeted communities and individuals. The Chantry's extensive educational and cultural networks provided channels for spreading anti-heretical propaganda, while the organization's charitable and welfare activities created economic incentives for conformity to religious orthodoxy. The result was often community-level persecution that required minimal direct intervention by religious authorities, while achieving substantial compliance with Chantry demands. The economic dimensions of religious persecution encompassed both the direct costs of maintaining specialized persecution apparatus and the broader economic consequences of suppressing alternative economic and social systems. The confiscation of property belonging to heretical organizations provided immediate financial benefits while also eliminating resources that might support continued resistance to religious authority. The economic integration of converted populations created additional incentives for religious conformity while also strengthening the Chantry's overall resource base. The international aspects of religious persecution reflected the Chantry's broader aspirations to continental religious authority and its willingness to support persecution efforts beyond the borders of friendly nations. The diplomatic pressure applied to secular governments to cooperate with anti-heretical campaigns demonstrated the organization's ability to use its political influence in service of religious objectives, while the provision of technical assistance and specialized personnel helped ensure effective persecution, even in regions where the Chantry lacked direct political control. The cultural consequences of sustained religious persecution extended far beyond the immediate suffering of targeted communities to encompass the loss of artistic traditions, intellectual achievements, and cultural diversity that had enriched civilization throughout Thedas. The destruction of libraries, artworks, and cultural artifacts eliminated irreplaceable sources of knowledge and beauty, while the suppression of alternative intellectual traditions reduced the overall sophistication and creativity of continental culture. The psychological effects of religious persecution on both victims and perpetrators created lasting damage to social trust and human relationships throughout much of Thedas. The fear and suspicion generated by systematic campaigns against religious dissent poisoned community relationships while encouraging informing and betrayal among neighbors and even family members. The moral corruption that resulted from participation in persecution activities damaged the spiritual health of even sincere believers, while undermining the credibility of religious institutions that claim to represent divine love and justice. The resistance movements that emerged in response to religious persecution demonstrated both the resilience of suppressed traditions and the ultimate limitations of even systematic persecution campaigns. The survival of elven religious practices, despite centuries of suppression, the persistence of magical traditions outside Chantry control, and the emergence of various heretical movements all testified to the difficulty of completely eliminating alternative spiritual traditions through force alone. The theological debates that emerged within the Chantry itself regarding the proper methods and extent of religious persecution revealed tensions between different interpretations of Andrastian doctrine and different approaches to achieving religious objectives. Some religious authorities emphasized conversion through persuasion and example, while others insisted that the urgency of spiritual salvation justified the use of force against those who refused to accept divine truth. The long-term consequences of religious persecution for the Chantry's own spiritual health and institutional effectiveness created ongoing challenges that would influence the organization's development for centuries. The association of religious authority with systematic violence and cultural destruction undermined the credibility of Chantry claims about divine love and spiritual liberation, while the practical necessities of maintaining persecution apparatus diverted resources and attention from more constructive religious activities. The adaptation strategies developed by persecuted communities provided models for cultural survival that would influence resistance movements throughout Thedas. The preservation of traditional knowledge through secret transmission, the development of coded cultural practices that could survive official scrutiny, and the creation of underground networks for mutual support all demonstrated the creativity and determination of communities struggling to maintain their identity under pressure. The regional variations in the intensity and effectiveness of religious persecution reflected differences in local political conditions, population characteristics, and the strength of alternative traditions. These variations provided natural experiments in different approaches to religious control, while also creating opportunities for persecuted communities to find refuge and continue their traditions in more tolerant regions. The Great Schisms and Reformations. Throughout its long history, the Chantry has faced numerous internal challenges that threaten to divide the organization and undermine its claims to universal religious authority. These schisms and Reformation movements emerged from genuine theological disagreements, political conflicts, and practical disputes about the proper organization and mission of religious institutions. The outcomes of these internal struggles have fundamentally shaped the character of Andrastian faith and its role in the broader political landscape of Thedas. The most significant early schism resulted in the permanent division between the Orlesian Chantry and the Imperial Chantry of Tevinter, creating competing centers of religious authority that would influence continental politics for centuries. This division emerged from irreconcilable differences regarding fundamental questions of religious doctrine, institutional organization, and the proper relationship between spiritual and magical authority. The theological sophistication of both sides and their access to substantial political and military resources ensured that this division would prove permanent despite centuries of conflict and negotiation. The Navaran Accord represents one of the most significant internal reforms in Chantry history, establishing new relationships between religious authority and the specialized organizations that had developed within the broader institutional framework. The agreement created formal structures for governing the relationship between the divine and the Templar Order, the Circle of Magi, and other specialized institutions, providing greater autonomy for these organizations while maintaining overall religious oversight. The theological controversies that led to the creation of various splinter movements within Andrastian faith reflected both the intellectual vitality of religious scholarship and the practical challenges of maintaining doctrinal unity across diverse populations and changing historical circumstances. The emergence of groups like the cult of Andraste demonstrated the appeal of alternative interpretations of religious truth, while their eventual suppression or absorption illustrated the institutional power that established religious authorities could bring to bear against dissenting movements. The Reformation movements that emerged periodically within the Chantry reflected genuine concerns about institutional corruption, theological error, and the organization's failure to live up to its spiritual ideals. These movements often began with sincere attempts to purify religious practice and return to authentic spiritual foundations, but their political implications inevitably brought them into conflict with established authorities who had vested interests in maintaining existing institutional arrangements. The Mage-Templar conflicts that erupted throughout Chantry history reflected fundamental tensions within the organization's approach to managing magical practitioners and supernatural threats. The theological framework that positioned magic as potentially dangerous but not inherently evil created ongoing disputes about the proper extent of religious oversight and the appropriate balance between protection and persecution. These conflicts often escalated into violence that threatened the stability of entire regions while exposing deep contradictions within Chantry doctrine and practice. The emergence of various mystical and prophetic movements within Andrastian communities created additional challenges for religious authorities struggling to maintain doctrinal control while accommodating genuine spiritual experiences. The theological problem of distinguishing between authentic divine revelation and dangerous delusion required sophisticated judgment that was often influenced more by political considerations than purely spiritual criteria. The suppression of some prophetic movements while accepting others revealed the extent to which institutional interests shaped religious decision-making. The regional variations in religious practice that developed throughout Chantry territories created ongoing tensions between local adaptation and institutional uniformity. The practical necessities of ministering to diverse populations with different cultural backgrounds and spiritual needs often required modifications to standard religious procedures, but these adaptations created potential precedents for broader doctrinal changes that could threaten overall institutional unity. The intellectual challenges posed by advances in magical theory, historical scholarship, and natural philosophy created ongoing pressures for theological development that sometimes conflicted with established doctrine. The discovery of new historical evidence about ancient events, the development of new magical techniques that challenged traditional understanding, and the emergence of new philosophical ideas all required theological responses that could maintain religious credibility while preserving institutional authority. The political pressures created by changing relationships with secular authorities required ongoing adaptation in religious policy and institutional organization. The rise of new political movements, the emergence of different forms of government, and the development of new approaches to international relations all created challenges for religious institutions that had developed their procedures and expectations based on earlier political arrangements. The economic changes that transformed society throughout Thedas created new challenges for religious institutions that had developed their financial structures and charitable activities based on earlier economic conditions. The emergence of new forms of commerce, the development of different approaches to property ownership, and the creation of new sources of wealth all required adaptive responses that could maintain religious effectiveness while preserving institutional stability. The cultural transformations that accompanied broader social and political changes created additional pressures for religious adaptation and reform. The development of new artistic traditions, the emergence of different educational approaches, and the evolution of popular culture all influenced religious practice while creating opportunities for both constructive development and dangerous deviation from established tradition. The military challenges posed by new forms of warfare, different types of enemies, and changing strategic circumstances required adaptive responses from religious institutions that had developed their military capabilities based on earlier threat assessments. The emergence of new magical techniques, the development of different military technologies, and the evolution of strategic doctrine all influenced religious military organizations while creating pressures for institutional reform. The diplomatic challenges created by changing international relationships required sophisticated responses from religious institutions that claimed universal authority while operating within particular political contexts. The need to maintain effective relationships with diverse secular authorities while preserving religious independence created ongoing tensions that required constant negotiation and periodic institutional adjustment. The theological synthesis that emerged from centuries of internal conflict and adaptation demonstrated both the intellectual vitality of Andrastian scholarship and the institutional resilience of the Chantry as an organization. The ability to incorporate new insights while maintaining essential doctrinal continuity provided a model for religious development that influenced other institutions throughout Thedas, while ensuring the survival and continued relevance of Andrastian faith. The precedents established through various Reformation movements and schismatic conflicts created frameworks for managing future internal challenges while providing models for both constructive change and dangerous division. The experiences gained through centuries of internal struggle provided valuable lessons about the importance of balancing institutional stability with necessary adaptation to changing circumstances. The international implications of internal Chantry conflicts extended far beyond purely religious matters to influence political developments, military strategies, and cultural trends throughout Thedas. The success or failure of various Reformation movements often provided indicators of broader social and political trends, while creating opportunities for secular authorities to advance their own objectives through religious alliances and interventions. Modern challenges: the Mage-Templar War and beyond. The eruption of open warfare between mages and Templars represents perhaps the most serious institutional crisis in the Chantry's history. fundamentally challenging the organization's traditional approach to managing magical practitioners, while exposing deep contradictions in religious doctrine and practice. This conflict emerged from decades of mounting tensions between the Circle of Magi and the Templar Order, but its immediate cause can be traced to specific events in Kirkwall that demonstrated the failure of existing institutional arrangements to provide sustainable solutions to the complex challenges posed by magical practice in organized society. The destruction of the Kirkwall Chantry by Andraste, a former circle mage driven to desperate action by years of oppression and institutional failure, provided the spark that ignited conflicts that had been building throughout the circle system for generations. The theological implications of this act of religious terrorism extended far beyond its immediate practical consequences, challenging fundamental assumptions about the relationship between spiritual authority and magical power, while forcing believers throughout Thedas to confront the contradictions inherent in their religious institutions. The collapse of the circle system that followed the initial outbreak of violence revealed the extent to which the Chantry's approach to magical oversight had depended on the voluntary cooperation of mages who had gradually lost faith in the institution's ability to provide fair and effective governance. The mass exodus of mages from circle institutions demonstrated that the theological framework for magical regulation had failed to address the legitimate concerns and aspirations of the populations it was meant to serve. The fragmentation of the Templar Order that accompanied the Mage Rebellion exposed similar problems within the military arm of religious authority. The extensive use of lyrium to enhance Templar capabilities had created physical and psychological dependencies that made many Templars vulnerable to manipulation and control, while the systematic indoctrination that was meant to ensure loyalty had often produced fanaticism that conflicted with the compassionate ideals supposedly central to Andrastian faith. The political chaos that resulted from the simultaneous collapse of both the Circle and Templar systems created enormous challenges for secular authorities throughout Thedas, who suddenly found themselves dealing with large populations of magical practitioners and religiously motivated warriors operating outside traditional institutional controls. The inability of existing political and legal frameworks to manage these populations effectively demonstrated the extent to which social stability throughout much of Thedas had depended on religious institutions that were no longer capable of fulfilling their traditional functions. The theological debates that emerged during and after the Mage-Templar War forced Andrastian scholars and believers to reconsider fundamental questions about the nature of magical power, the proper role of religious authority, and the relationship between divine will and human institutions. The obvious failure of established religious policies created opportunities for theological innovation, while also raising serious questions about the reliability of institutional religious authority and the validity of traditional interpretations of divine will. The emergence of the Second Inquisition during this crisis represented both a return to earlier forms of religious organization and an attempt to develop new approaches to the challenges posed by magical practice and institutional failure. The Inquisition's claim to divine mandate and its ability to operate independently of existing institutional structures provided a model for religious authority that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining effective functionality. The resolution of the immediate crisis through the conclave at Haven and the subsequent events at the Temple of Sacred Ashes demonstrated both the potential for religious innovation and the ongoing dangers posed by unresolved theological and practical problems. The mysterious explosion that destroyed the conclave and created the breach revealed the continued relevance of ancient magical and spiritual forces that existing religious frameworks were inadequate to understand or control. The role of the Inquisitor as a figure who could bridge the gap between religious and secular authority, between magical and non-magical populations, and between competing theological traditions, provided a model for leadership that transcended traditional institutional boundaries. The Inquisitor's ability to make decisions based on practical effectiveness rather than institutional precedent, demonstrated the potential benefits of more flexible approaches to religious and political authority. The political consequences of the Mage-Templar War extended far beyond the immediate religious sphere to influence international relations, military strategies, and social policies throughout Thedas. The collapse of traditional mechanisms for magical regulation forced secular authorities to develop new approaches to managing magical practitioners, while also creating opportunities for political entrepreneurs who could offer effective solutions to urgent practical problems. The cultural impact of the conflict challenged traditional assumptions about the relationship between spiritual and temporal authority, while creating new opportunities for artistic and intellectual expression. The breakdown of traditional censorship mechanisms allowed for more open discussion of controversial topics, while the practical necessity of cooperation between previously antagonistic groups created new forms of cultural synthesis and innovation. The economic disruption caused by the collapse of traditional institutional arrangements created both challenges and opportunities for communities throughout Thedas. The loss of services previously provided by Circle and Templar institutions forced communities to develop alternative arrangements, while the availability of magical practitioners who were no longer bound by traditional restrictions created new possibilities for economic development and innovation. The military implications of having large numbers of trained mages and Templars operating outside traditional command structures created new strategic challenges for secular authorities, while also providing opportunities for those who could effectively organize and deploy these powerful but potentially unstable forces. The integration of magical support with conventional military forces required new tactical doctrines and organizational arrangements that could maximize effectiveness, while minimizing the risks associated with magical warfare. The diplomatic challenges created by the transnational character of the conflict required new approaches to international law and relations that could address the concerns of multiple sovereigns while managing the practical problems posed by mobile populations of magical practitioners and religious warriors. The development of new frameworks for refugee protection, military cooperation, and resource sharing demonstrated the adaptability of existing political institutions, while also revealing their limitations. The technological and magical innovations that emerged from the crisis reflected both the creative potential unleashed by the breakdown of traditional restrictions and the desperate need for new solutions to unprecedented challenges. The development of new magical techniques, the creation of innovative military technologies, and the emergence of new approaches to education and training all demonstrated the capacity for rapid adaptation when existing institutional arrangements proved inadequate. The religious revival movements that emerged in response to the crisis reflected both the continued appeal of traditional spiritual values and the widespread recognition that existing institutional arrangements required fundamental reform. These movements often combined conservative theological positions with radical proposals for institutional change, creating new forms of religious expression that could address contemporary challenges while maintaining connection to ancient spiritual traditions. The emergence of new forms of magical education and regulation represented one of the most significant long-term consequences of the Mage-Templar War, as communities throughout Thedas were forced to develop alternative approaches to managing magical practitioners and supernatural threats. The diversity of solutions that emerged demonstrated both the creativity of local adaptation and the absence of any single model that could address all the challenges posed by magical practice in organized society. The transformation of the Templar Order from a unified religious military organization into various independent or semi-independent groups reflected broader patterns of institutional fragmentation that characterized the post-war period. Some Templar groups maintained traditional religious loyalties while adapting their operational methods, while others evolved into essentially secular military organizations that retained Templar training and equipment but abandoned religious mission and oversight. The evolution of circle institutions from religious educational establishments into more diverse forms of magical organization demonstrated the potential for creative adaptation, while also revealing the ongoing tensions between magical autonomy and social responsibility. The success of different organizational models varied significantly depending on local conditions, population characteristics, and the effectiveness of leadership and governance arrangements. The future of faith, religious evolution in Thedas. As we reach the conclusion of our journey through the complex history of the Chantry and its profound influence on Thedas, we must consider how this ancient institution continues to evolve in response to contemporary challenges while maintaining its fundamental spiritual mission. The events of recent decades have forced religious authorities, believers, and secular leaders throughout the continent to reconsider basic assumptions about the role of organized religion in society and the proper relationship between spiritual authority and practical governance. The theological implications of recent revelations about the true nature of ancient history, the origins of the veil, and the relationship between elven gods and contemporary magical practice have created unprecedented challenges for Andrastian doctrine. The discovery that many fundamental assumptions about creation, divine history, and the nature of magical power were based on incomplete or inaccurate information has forced religious scholars to reconsider centuries of established theological interpretation, while maintaining the essential spiritual truths that provide meaning and guidance for millions of believers. The political landscape that has emerged from the collapse of traditional Circle Templar arrangements reflects both the resilience of religious institutions and their capacity for adaptation to dramatically change circumstances. The survival of Chantry authority in various forms throughout most of Thedas demonstrates the continued relevance of organized religious leadership, while the diversity of new arrangements that have emerged shows the potential for creative responses to contemporary challenges. The cultural transformations that continue to reshape society throughout Thedas create ongoing opportunities and challenges for religious institutions that must maintain spiritual relevance while adapting to rapidly changing social conditions. The increased mobility of populations, the breakdown of traditional social hierarchies, and the emergence of new forms of cultural expression all require adaptive responses that can preserve essential religious values while embracing beneficial innovations. The economic changes that accompany broader social transformations create new requirements for religious institutions that must maintain financial stability while fulfilling their spiritual and charitable missions. The development of new forms of commerce, the emergence of different economic relationships, and the evolution of property and labor arrangements all influence religious economic activities, while creating new opportunities for service and ministry. The educational needs of contemporary society require religious institutions to reconsider their traditional approaches to learning and intellectual development while maintaining their commitment to spiritual formation and moral guidance. The integration of new knowledge about history, nature, and magical practice with traditional religious wisdom creates opportunities for enriched understanding while also requiring careful attention to theological consistency and spiritual authenticity. The international dimensions of contemporary religious life reflect both the continued importance of transnational religious identity and the practical necessities of accommodating diverse political and cultural arrangements. The maintenance of religious unity across national boundaries requires diplomatic skill and institutional flexibility, while the preservation of distinctive religious identity requires attention to doctrinal consistency and spiritual authenticity. The technological and magical innovations that continue to transform society throughout Thedas create new possibilities for religious service, while also raising new questions about the proper relationship between spiritual and material advancement. The integration of magical techniques with traditional religious practices offers opportunities for enhanced effectiveness, while also requiring careful attention to theological implications and spiritual consequences. The environmental and social challenges that face communities throughout Thedas create new requirements for religious leadership that can provide both practical guidance and spiritual comfort in the face of unprecedented difficulties. The capacity to respond effectively to disasters, conflicts, and social disruptions while maintaining religious credibility and spiritual authority represents one of the most significant challenges facing contemporary religious institutions. The interfaith relationships that have become increasingly important in a more connected and diverse world require new approaches to religious diplomacy and cooperation that can preserve distinctive theological commitments while enabling practical collaboration on shared concerns. The development of frameworks for respectful dialogue and joint action across religious boundaries represents an ongoing challenge that will influence the future development of religious institutions throughout Thedas. The generational changes that affect all institutions create particular challenges for religious organizations that depend on the transmission of traditional knowledge and values across time while remaining relevant to contemporary spiritual needs. The balance between preserving essential religious heritage and adapting to changing circumstances requires ongoing attention to both conservation and innovation in religious education and practice. The scholarly and intellectual developments that continue to advance understanding of history, nature, and human society create ongoing requirements for theological adaptation that can integrate new knowledge with established religious truth. The maintenance of intellectual credibility while preserving spiritual authority requires sophisticated engagement with contemporary learning and careful attention to the implications of new discoveries for religious doctrine and practice. As we contemplate the future evolution of religious life in Thedas, we see both the enduring power of spiritual truth and the constant necessity for institutional adaptation to changing circumstances. The Chantry's long history demonstrates both the potential for religious institutions to provide meaning, guidance, and practical service across centuries of social change, and the importance of maintaining flexibility and responsiveness to contemporary needs and challenges. The lessons learned from the Chantry's complex history provide valuable guidance for understanding the proper role of religious institutions in society and the appropriate balance between spiritual authority and practical accommodation. The successes and failures of various approaches to religious organization, theological development, and political engagement offer insights that remain relevant for contemporary religious leadership and institutional planning. The ongoing vitality of Andrastian faith, despite centuries of internal conflict, external pressure, and institutional failure, demonstrates the resilience of authentic spiritual conviction and the capacity of religious truth to survive even serious institutional inadequacies. This resilience provides hope for the continued relevance of religious institutions while also highlighting the importance of ongoing reform and adaptation to ensure that institutional arrangements serve rather than hinder authentic spiritual development. The diversity of contemporary expressions of Andrastian faith reflects both the universal appeal of its central spiritual insights and the adaptability of its institutional arrangements to different cultural and political contexts. This diversity provides evidence of the religion's continued vitality, while also creating challenges for maintaining doctrinal consistency and institutional unity across varied circumstances. The influence of Andrastian civilization on the broader development of culture, law, education, and international relations throughout Thedas demonstrates the profound impact that religious institutions can have on human society when they successfully combine spiritual authenticity with practical effectiveness. This influence provides a model for contemporary religious engagement, while also highlighting the enormous responsibility that accompanies religious authority and influence. As we conclude this exploration of the Chantry's role in shaping Thedas, we are reminded of the enduring human need for meaning, guidance, and community that religious institutions are uniquely positioned to provide. The challenges facing contemporary society require responses that combine spiritual wisdom with practical knowledge, moral clarity with political sophistication, and institutional stability with adaptive flexibility. The future of religious life in Thedas will depend on the ability of spiritual leaders and believing communities to learn from their rich and complex history, while remaining open to the guidance of divine truth as it continues to be revealed through changing circumstances and emerging challenges. The balance between conservation and innovation, between tradition and adaptation, remains the central challenge for religious institutions that seek to serve both divine truth and human need in an ever-changing world. The story of the Chantry and Andraste reminds us that religious institutions, for all their human limitations and historical failures, remain among the most powerful forces for both individual transformation and social change available to human civilization. The responsibility to use this power wisely and effectively remains as urgent today as it was in the earliest days of Andrastian faith, requiring continued commitment to both spiritual authenticity and practical service in the name of divine love and truth. And so concludes our journey through the sacred and the political, the divine and the mortal, the triumphs and the tragedies that have shaped the religious landscape of Thedas. The legacy of Andraste and the institutions she inspired continues to evolve, continues to challenge, and continues to provide both hope and guidance for those who seek meaning in an often turbulent world. Sweet dreams, fellow adventurers, and may your own journey be blessed with wisdom, courage, and faith. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of how religion shaped the world of Dragon Age. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of Thedas, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Sleep 2 RPG for more epic gaming lore designed for peaceful rest. Until our next adventure together, sleep well and dream of distant realms.